Hello, I'm going to do a little another extension in regards to the Parthenon, but it's worth going back. So part one of this series of the Parthenon, and so what we have here is the Parthenon columns. You can even see the module, so basically the proportions. So I'm going to focus in on the Parthenon, the columns there, and what we have is a 3:11 ratio. Very important because that's the ratio of the Great Pyramid. Also alludes to circling the square. We also have the golden ratio. I'll show you just a better. Okay, so you can see the angle of the pyramid side slope is phi, therefore Pythagorean theorem. That's the square root of phi, and we also have these pi ratio, which emerges from this very simple, very lovely geometry. And this geometry is not just built into the Great Pyramid, and as I pointed out in part one, it's also in the Parthenon. But that also leads us to, so now if 11 is 1, then 3 is 0, or 27.3% is another way, which is describes the size of the Earth in relation to the size of the Earth in relation to the Moon. Another interesting thing in regards to this, is something called the Barycenter. So let me get the right one. I've got a few mistakes. Okay, so as an example here on the left, I've just simplified, I've dropped it down just to show you how the square in regards to the circle is 27.3% the size of the Earth. But that same diagram also gives us another extraordinary piece of information, and that's the Barycenter. So this red line here. Now that so the Moon does not orbit the center, the core of the Earth, because it has its mass as well. They're in a ballet, and that ballet puts the orbit of the Earth around the Barycenter, or 27.3% below the Earth's surface, which just happens to be, if I can get that into screen better. So what's the Barycenter? 1,000 miles, and there's a slight wobble in that, but you'd be accurate to say either the Barycenter is 27.3% below the Earth's surface, or 1,000 miles, or 5,000 kilometers. So that's how another aspect in regards to circling the square and the Great Pyramid ratio emerges. So that's in there as well. Now, okay, here for an example, it's built into all these temples. But back to Sanchi Stupa. So this is in India, and apart from the Parthenon, the Temple of Olympian Zeus, and these are just examples I'm working on. There's a lot more to it, a lot of other examples, a lot of more evidence to show that this method I've been discussing in this particular series is echoed throughout so much of the ancient world, and carries through to modern architecture, places such as Washington, DC, the Capitol building, White House, all the major memorials and monuments, and etc. Now, back to Sanchi. Okay, so here we see a description of Sanchi. Now, the total height of Sanchi, you can see 42 feet and 14 feet. If you do a Google search, you'll see that it's, and I made this mistake in an earlier video, that it's 54 feet, which is nice too. However, what happens in the internet so often is that, well, people don't pay attention. The measures is not considered important because it's considered to be no information in the measures of ancient temples, because it's just assumed that they didn't know anything, therefore blah de blah, and that's, don't look there. So anyway, we haven't made a card for it, but okay, 14 to 42, so 56 the total height, and that's 42. Therefore 42 over 56, that's a 3:4 ratio. But you also notice, so all these other little measurements in regards to there are very important as well. It's not just this one. They've reinforced this knowledge over and over again. Now, for instance, these the Tirana gates, 33.5 foot. Because of this slight little lift, I would actually say that they're 33, but I'm not going to harp on that because I'm going to stay with the survey. But for instance, 56 feet high columns. I've got more evidence, very, very, very confident now that the Corinthian foot of ancient times, which doesn't seem to be any record of it, is actually what's later called the Cremona foot. and that appeared for a while, and around about 150 years ago it just disappeared. But the architects of the time, especially here in Australia or Washington and London, Paris, they've all used it because you'll find the same harmonics, the same proportions appearing. Again, now, interesting point is that 56 feet is 48 Cremona feet, which will also bring us back to the Parthenon. Previous episode, Salamis stone, something I've been harping on a bit, was very, very important. It connects to a lot of stuff in ancient Egypt, Sumer, and the Indus Valley, and we'll get to that more and more in future. But so what we have is 48 Cremona feet, 48 feet, which delivers all these lovely harmonic numbers I covered earlier. But you also notice that 42 feet and 14 feet, again, whether it's 36 or 12, these are the same. They're reflected constantly throughout the ancient and modern architecture, very harmonic, loaded with information, brings you to all the lovely, 108, 144, all that 432, all those numbers. But my point is that the Temple of Olympian Zeus, the first Corinthian temple to be completed, a true Corinthian temple, that the measure used was the Cremona foot, and now, for instance, there's a lot more in Sanchi, and so, for instance, because just I started out with pointing out the Pi ratio of the Great Pyramid, which is reflected in the Parthenon. Well, it's also here in Sanchi, but let's begin. So 7 feet. Well, there's a lot of nice, the same pattern, same things emerge over and over consistently without fail, but it's all, nothing to see here. It's just all coincidence. But for instance, Pentagon, Phi, also through trig. Now, the Eratosthenes measured the Earth at 252,000 stadia. Depending on which stadia you use, he was either very accurate or precise with his measurements. But that's to the side for the moment. Now, 112. Now, again, Eastern tradition, 112 chakras in the human body. There are 2 on the outside. But of the 112, there are 4 that we cannot tune. So there's said to be 108 on the inside, 112 in total. 112 pounds in the imperial hundredweight, 112 cogs in these, for instance, Chartres Cathedral, all these labyrinths around the place, variations on the 4 elements, but also you'll find it in the Vesica. It's one of these things. Now, at 21, well, 21 is a triangular number, so is 210. 21st Greek alphabet is Phi. 21st Hebrew letter is Shin. Very important in alchemy and Freemasonry, the lion's paw, and you might, that's where they got it from. Connected to, of course, to the Tetragrammaton, either 216 or 72 letters. Again, wonderful, lovely harmonics. Also, 21 being related to Phi as well, because it's a Fibonacci number. Now, 21, okay, 28's perfect number. Again, it's a triangular number, 28-day menstrual cycle, 280 Royal Egyptian cubits. It's a triangular number as well. 28, lunar mansion, again connecting to the sidereal month of 27.3 days, or every 28th day, as in the menstrual cycle. But what happens is that all these measures are based on the Cremona scale. Therefore, if we convert 7 feet to Cremona, we get 6, 8, 18, 24. Well, for instance, 216, 21,600 nautical miles by definition describes the Earth. 21,600 minutes in the compass, the diameter of the moon, the years per platonic month, the cube, the Vesica, New Jerusalem as well. 216 being a lovely number in the 3rd dimension as well. 6 times 6 times 6 is 216, so you might get a hint there. 72 is the same thing, precession. The sun, the moon, geometry all across the board, ancient time scales, all these same things keep coming back, keep re-emerging across all this ancient architecture, and it's still just a coincidence. 72 heartbeats per minute. Well, there are 60 seconds per minute, and that creates a 6/5 ratio as well. 72% of human body is water. Again, ancient ancient measure scales through to the modern scales, through to screen resolution and all this type of thing. It just carries on and on, all across ancient traditions. eastern all across to the west, even beginning at the ancient Egyptians, both Osiris and Thoth being connected to this number. Again, 18, geometry, proportions of the moon, that's on the long and the ionic scale, and we'll get into that as well. So what you have is a 7-foot gap here, but you have the gateway around it, the enclosure is 11 feet high. Now, convert 11 feet, you get these numbers, and begin with 33 gods on Mount Meru. The 33, there's no shortage of importance there, but okay, begin with 396. The Earth and the Moon. Now, ionic yards, 396. Now, that's important because I mentioned ionic. I've been talking about this, so not just the architectural style, it's also the ionic foot. And so we have a lovely conversion here from this ancient Greek going over, but also the long fathom. So 1.056 feet is one Persian or one long foot. It might extend all the way back to the original Stonehenge phase 1, where it was the 56 Aubrey holes. But again, the pyramid and New Jerusalem, 1056, 0 cubits. But again, these are all conversion tools, so it's not so I'm just harping on about it. But whether it's New Jerusalem, Ark of Utnapishtim, Great Pyramid, Stonehenge, all these ancient temples, always the same. 176, so 1760 yards per mile, but the perimeter of the Great Pyramid, by definition, 1760 Egyptian royal cubits, 132. Okay, same thing, just geometry, it's all sort of blends in. Now 44, so 440 Egyptian royal cubits. Between the 4th and the 5th, 369, you might notice here as well. Well, that brings us to 440. That's a 4D thing. I've done some videos on that, but there's this binomial theorem. There's another way to look at it, and it brings us to harmonic numbers. It's just fucking brilliant, if I say so myself. But okay, A440. So we got all music, arithmetic, all this coming in. And as an example comparison, so 28 and 440, what we have is the Great Pyramid, but it's more interesting than that. Well, again, the perimeter, because at a 7 to 11 ratio, we have the Great Pyramid proportions. Now, okay, that's just a coincidence. There's nothing to see here. Well, 11 over 7 is pi over 2, and the Cremona scale, what happens? Well, Cremona fathom, 1.57142, exactly the same number going on there. And this is a 2D sketch. Now, one of the points I like to focus on in the Great Pyramid is we need to look at it at a 3D object. So if you stand at the corner, you see 880 over 280 for height. Therefore, we get 22 over 7, more than acceptable definition of pi. And of course, that converts on the Cremona scale once more. The Great Pyramid, Parthenon, all have this in there. So obviously by proportion, so does Sanchi Stupa. And in case we missed that, they might say they've, just like with the Great Pyramid and other places, they've built it in with number as well. So the proportions are matched by the measurements. This is how it works. It's what's as above, so below. What's on the inside, what's on the outside, what's in the proportion is in the measurement. These same numbers also bring us to the same musical scales. Again, covered so many other videos all across the world, all across time, all across cultures. Nothing to see here, it's just a coincidence. And so yeah, 7, 11, 14. Okay, I need to pause a moment. Okay, so Sanchi Stupa, what we have is like 7, 11 and 14 feet, and those are relevant. So relevant now. For instance, the Great Pyramid proportions here, I'm using a diagram I use because this is built into road networks all across the world, modern time, but it goes back quite some bit. So we have the 7:11 to a ratio, which gives us pi. Now, for instance, Melancholia 1 by Albrecht Dürer, that's one example. Cloud Gate in Chicago, the Louvre Pyramid, these are all based on the Great Pyramid proportions, and it's just one of these things in plain sight. Of course, the Earth and the Moon. Now, again, if you were to turn that sideways, that would also give you other information. Now, back to Sanchi. And so, essentially, what we have, the Parthenon Columns, 3 to 11 or 11 to 14 ratio, same as in the Great Pyramid, and also in Sanchi Stupa. So, what we have is, again, and I'll get more into it in future episodes, because even the Great Pyramid measurements will correspond wonderfully to this same system. And so the already talked about the Salamis stone, the conversion point there from the Parthenon, how it's reflected in Sanchi. 3 to 11. Now, so that portion which is 11 high is 37.714285 feet. That's important. We'll come back to that. But what I mean by, so all throughout Sanchi, all of the measures gives us Cremona feet. So even here we see this 120 feet, but with 10 feet on either side. So, oops, there's a typo there. That should be 140 or 10 times. So again, 120 Cremona cubits. It's all built around Cremona. Now, with the only exception being, well, I've discussed the 33 feet, and I want to get more info on that, but with the only exception, 11 does not convert to Cremona feet in whole numbers, but as I showed earlier, it actually converts to the proportions of the Great Pyramid. But why is that relevant? Because if we, okay, firstly, all of Sanchi's built around the Cremona scale except for 11 and 33, but they in themselves bring us back to this method. The Cremona scale, like up to, from the early 1800s, it was, you'll find references to it, and then it sort of seemed to have disappeared. Yet, key architects such as Norman Foster are still using it to this day. If we apply that to, well, Temple of Olympian Zeus, we get 48 Cremona feet, just like the Parthenon, 48 feet high. And, well, back to here. So 48 feet would be 14. The 11 ratio is 37.7148. And we need to consider the 11-foot scale, which doesn't fit. And what do we get? 37.7142. Exactly the same number, but on the Cremona scale. And if we go back, so for instance, back to the Great Pyramid and this 11-foot scale, not only does it deliver us the measures so important in the Great Pyramid, we also get the 711, but it also converts to so the Cremona scale reinforces the proportions once more. And also both 1 and 2D is reflected in that, and so is the 37.714 feet, and that's pretty much. So Sanchi Stupa is just one more example where not only does the proportion count, so do the measures, and the measures reinforce the proportion. These measure scales, again, cross time, cross cultures, and whether the architects of the last couple of centuries are aware of it or not, I cannot say. I would believe so, because of the way they use it and incorporate it is so balanced with the way that it works here. And again, like Norman Foster being one example, I.M. Pei, Daniel Libeskind, basically all the rock stars of modern architecture are doing this. They get the and same with sculptors such as Tony Rosenthal and these other people who get the cream of the cream jobs. And well, yeah, they all clearly know about this. So Sanchi Stupa, the Parthenon, the Great Pyramid, and I'll get more into it because, well, it's never ending, and it connects so much to the Cremona scale. Also connect, again, just wonderful connections from the foot, the Doric foot, and the Ionic foot, and how even the proportions which define these also define other measure systems. So once you understand these, you can simply, like a simple conversion, 16 to 15 will bring you over to the long foot or Royal Babylonian, depending on what your original point is. Once you have one worked out, all the rest will follow in course. And another interesting point, okay, bring me up. Okay, I might have failed to mention it in the last video, so I'll just bring it up in regards to proportion and the laying out of temple plans. And where are we? Salamis stone. And in regards to the Ionic order, so So this was covered in the last episode, but I just think I forgot to mention it because we have the Doric order architecture and how so we have Doric, a Doric column, the Parthenon, and we also have these triglyphs. Now the triglyphs are also important because as Anne Balkans points out in some of her work, not only are they a feature, but they're a very important feature because the width of the triglyph will then give you a basic unit from which all the other proportions will work out and the measurements will work out inside the building. I covered that again in an early episode. I won't go into it. But yeah, all the harmonic number, it's done with extraordinary precision, with an extraordinary amount of, just consider the effort that goes into building one of these temples. You know, these all the pieces that, for instance, the Parthenon, there is not a one straight line on this thing. Every single piece was unique to its position. You couldn't just move one drum or one block elsewhere. Everything is curved, and there's a wonderful, highly skilled and so wonderfully designed. And this is part of our collective past. This stuff is our birthright, and the quadrivium has been written out of pretty much out of the history books the same way the sort of the deeper history of Masons and Oddfellows has been written out and replaced with David Icke-ish type of demonization. And well, there's so much into this anyway. So again, there's I'll sort of go through it fairly quickly, but there's a lot to cover, and this will apply to so much else. So just begin, if you just start with one or one small collection of these apparently separate temples, such as Egypt, Greece, and India, you'll find, and not just modern art, but it crosses ancient architecture as well. And so firstly, big thumbs up to Mark Wilson Jones, to Anne Balkans, also to Randall Carlson, and I know I'm forgetting a few, Scott Onstott, but yeah, everything that I do is built off firstly compiling research of Alan Green's another awesome researcher, and I'm only able to bring forth this type of my angle being the measurements. I'm only able to bring it forth because of the work done by these other people as well. And so again, I hope you enjoyed, hope you get something out of it. It really is something that can be measured and tested, and one of the key points is this, again, Pi-Phi ratio, and the Great Pyramid being one of the holy of holies of sacred architecture, and of course the 7 liberal arts, especially the quadrivium: music, arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy. This is a system we should be going back to this method for education. The modern education system is corrupt. Anyway, that's a rant. I hope you enjoyed. Have a good one.